You might think living in a medieval castle was like a fairy tale. We imagine the high stone walls, the knights in shining armor, the grand feasts, and the romance. But if you actually traveled back to the 13th century, the first thing that would hit you wouldn't be the majesty of the king. It would be the smell, a burning, eye-watering stench that filled the corridors and the courtyards. Today, going to the bathroom is a private, sanitary, and boring part of our day. But in the Middle Ages, the toilet, known then as the privy or the garderobe, was the most dangerous room in the entire castle. It wasn't just disgusting, it was a legitimate death trap. From enemy soldiers crawling up the pipes to assassins waiting with spears in the dark, sitting on the toilet could literally cost you your life. In this video, we are going to explore the dirty, horrifying, and deadly history of the castle toilet. And by the end, you will be very, very thankful for modern plumbing. To understand why it was so dangerous, we first have to look at the engineering. How did castles deal with human waste before running water? In most fortresses, the toilet was built into a small room called a garderobe. It was essentially a bench made of stone or wood with a hole cut into it. This bench protruded out from the castle wall, hanging over the empty air. Gravity did all the heavy lifting. The waste would fall down a long stone shaft or a wooden chute and exit through a hole at the bottom of the wall, usually splashing into the castle moat or a giant cesspit dug into the ground. Now, here is a weird fact. You might be wondering why it was called a garderobe. That sounds a lot like the modern word wardrobe, right? Well, that is actually where the word comes from. In medieval times, lords and ladies would hang their expensive clothes inside the toilet room. This wasn't because they ran out of closet space. It was a practical, albeit gross, life hack. The smell of ammonia from the urine was so strong, and the fumes rising from the pit were so toxic, that they actually killed fleas, mites, and moths on the clothes. So, if you were a rich medieval noble, your best jacket probably smelled like a public restroom, but at least it didn't have bugs in it. However, this design had a fatal flaw. That long stone shaft wasn't just an exit. It was an entrance. The castle walls were designed to keep enemies out. Thick stone, iron gates, archers on the roof. But the toilet shaft was a direct tunnel into the heart of the castle that no one wanted to guard because, well, it stank. And this brings us to one of the most horrifying ways to die in history: the toilet assassin. Imagine it is the year 1016. You are King Edmund II of England, known as Edmund Ironside. You are a powerful warrior who has survived brutal battles against the Danish invaders. You are heavily guarded by the best soldiers in the land. But you have enemies everywhere. One night, nature calls. You go to the privy alone. You sit down on the wooden bench, and suddenly, everything goes black. According to historical chronicles, an assassin was hiding in the cesspit below, literally standing deep in the human waste. He had been waiting there for hours, breathing in the toxic fumes, waiting for the specific moment the king would visit the privy. When Edmund sat down, the assassin thrust a spear or a sharp dagger upward, straight into the king's body. It was a gruesome, humiliating, and incredibly painful way to die. The privy was the one place where a king was alone, unarmed, with his pants down, and completely vulnerable. It was the ultimate sniper spot for the Middle Ages. And Edmund wasn't the only one. Godfrey the Hunchback, the Duke of Lower Lorraine, suffered an almost identical fate in 1076. Someone knew his schedule, waited in the filth, and struck from below. But if you think a spear from below is bad, it gets worse. Sometimes it wasn't just one assassin. Sometimes entire armies used the bathroom to destroy a kingdom. The most famous example of this happened in 1204, during the siege of Château Gaillard in France. This castle was a masterpiece of military engineering, built by Richard the Lionheart. It was considered impregnable. The walls were too high, the defenders were too strong, and the location on a high cliff made it impossible to storm. The French army, led by King Philip II, had been trying to get in for months with zero success. They were starving, tired, and ready to give up, until they found the bathroom. A French soldier was scouting around the base of the cliffs when he noticed the opening of a garderobe chute halfway up the wall. It was a tight, slippery, filthy stone tunnel that led straight into the castle. But crucially, because it was a toilet, it was unguarded. A small team of brave, or perhaps crazy, soldiers decided to do the unthinkable. They decided to invade through the sewer. Imagine that crawl. They had to climb vertically inside a narrow stone tube, slipping on slime and filth, breathing in toxic methane fumes, all while trying not to make a single sound. If anyone flushed from above, it would have been a disaster. But they made it. They emerged inside the castle, specifically in the latrines near the chapel. Covered in waste but fully armed, they surprised the guards, killed them quietly, and lowered the drawbridge to let the rest of the French army in. One of the strongest castles in Europe didn't fall to a catapult or a battering ram. It fell because of a toilet chute. This proved that a fortress is only as strong as its stinkiest link. We've talked about the kings getting stabbed and the soldiers climbing pipes, but what about the people who had to clean up the mess? This brings us to the absolute worst job in history, the Gong Farmer. If the waste didn't fall into a moat to be washed away, it fell into a cesspit, a deep, stagnant hole in the ground. Eventually, that hole would fill up, and someone had to empty it. Gong Farmers were the brave souls paid to dig out the solid human waste. By law, in many medieval towns, they were only allowed to work at night, typically between 9 p.m. and 5 a.m., because the smell of their work was considered too offensive for the public during the day. They would climb down into the pits, shovel the waste into buckets, and cart it away to be used as fertilizer on farms. It wasn't just gross, it was potentially lethal. The pits produced toxic gases, specifically hydrogen sulfide and methane. There are actual historical records of Gong farmers climbing into a pit, passing out from the fumes, and suffocating in the muck before anyone could pull them out. Others died from terrible infections that seeped into small cuts on their skin. But interestingly, it was a well-paid job. In a time of extreme poverty, men risked their lungs and dignity for a decent wage and plenty of alcohol, which was often provided as part of the payment to help them deal with the smell. They were the unsung, tragic heroes of medieval sanitation. Speaking of jobs, there was one toilet-related position that people actually fought to get. It was called the Groom of the Stool. This person was an intimate servant to the king. His job? To help the king undress, provide a wash basin and towel, and yes, to wipe the royal bottom. It sounds degrading to us, but in the Tudor era, this was a position of massive power. The groom was alone with the king during his most private moments. He could whisper advice, ask for favors, and hear the king's secrets while everyone else was locked out of the room. It was a high-status role reserved for the sons of noblemen. People were literally lining up to wipe the king just to get close to power. But no amount of money, power, or guards could save you from the invisible killer, disease. Castles were breeding grounds for bacteria. Since the waste often dumped directly into the moat, and the castle drew its water from nearby wells, cross-contamination was incredibly common. The water they drank was often poisoned by the waste they produced. Dysentery, known historically as the bloody flux, killed more soldiers and kings than swords ever did. King Henry V, the great warrior who won the Battle of Agincourt, didn't die in combat. He died of dysentery at age 35. He literally pooped himself to death. Sanitation wasn't just a comfort issue. It was a matter of national security. When an army got sick from their own latrines, the war was often lost before the battle even began. So, the next time you visit old castle ruins and look up at those majestic stone walls, don't just think about the battles and the glory. Look for the small hole in the wall. Think about the assassin with the spear waiting below. Think about the soldier crawling up the chute. And think about the poor Gong farmer working in the dark. History is fascinating, but it is also incredibly dirty. And personally, I'm very happy to live in the 21st century. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this dirty dive into history, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about how people survived the past. Let me know in the comments. Would you rather be a medieval knight or a modern plumber? See you in the next video.